All right, folks. Thanks to Phil Scone from Broadcom. He's going to talk about NetMaster's SmartTrace and link it back to the previous Wireshark presentation. Okay, over to you, Phil.
Yeah, so my name is Phil Shane. I'm a developer on the NetMaster team, doing a whole host of networking. And today we're going to be talking about getting started with NetMaster's SmartTrace and the smart tracing functionality that we have here and what we can sort of do with it. Slide. So SmartTrace is our sort of industry-leading packet capture tool that allows you to target the exact data that you need to capture, for easier diagnosis and, resolution of your networking problems. What really sets it apart is the, granular control that we allow, targeting just the packets that you need to see, starting and stopping traces automatically, analyzing and diagnosing network issues, as well as exporting to the format of your choice. And that's that PCAP format that we'll talk about in a little bit here. So where to create and utilize smart traces, right? Smart traces is, such a useful tool and it's core to our product that we allow you to create and view smart traces from many different places. Our primary goal here is ease of use. Wherever you feel most at home and whatever you're trying to achieve, smart trace is available to you. And so we support it in the NetMaster API, the NetMaster web portal, NetMaster Network Insights, which is our Watchtower integration, of course, in the 3270, and as well as some specific places within the NetMaster product that we'll talk about later as well. So the first thing we're going to go over is our NetMaster API. We'll start in what SmartTrace is available in there, right? So the NetMaster API is a Java-based API running on ZOS that provides NetMaster data in an easy-to-consume format. NetMaster provides a very feature-rich API that exposes a lot of the core functionality of NetMaster, and of course, central to that is going to be our implementation of SmartTrace in there. Of all the API endpoints that we have, and we do have quite a bit, I think the SmartTrace ones really lend themselves to automation in some of the best ways. We support all the functionality such as creating, starting, viewing, and exporting traces and their data associated. All of this SmartTrace and NetMaster data can enable you to automate and script network tracing at your site, as well as to send the data wherever it needs to go. This can be utilized in a ton of different ways, but the two primary ways we see customers take advantage of our APIs the most is one, by feeding data to their own custom dashboards that they might have, and then two, automating smart traces based on alerts or other criteria you might encounter. Since the API uses the Open API standard, it's super easy to feed NetMaster data to any custom dashboarding tool you might have, whether that be Splunk or Grafana, or maybe some other homegrown solution that you have. NetMaster API returns standard JSON and thus can easily be fed into your visualization tool. Once it's in that tool, or perhaps some other operations dashboard you might have, we've seen customers automate traces based on criteria. Say you get an alert from like a kick server, or you see something that might not be right in a dashboard. Whenever that connection comes in, rather than finding all the criteria, logging into NetMaster, creating and activating a trace, you can utilize the API to do all of that automated for you, right? Just set up a little script to create that trace and run it, and that'll help you ensure that you capture the data that you need without relying on human intervention. You don't want to lose that critical data associated with that trace. And by having it automated through the API, we can really help with that. And with the API, there's so many ways to use it, and that's really the beauty of it. We provide all this networking data and SmartTrace data right to you, and it's up to you how you want to view that and utilize it. Of course, we're Zoe v3 conformant, and you can onboard the API to the Zoe API ML as well if you have that up and running at your site. And we sort of back what we build. We have the NetMaster API and the NetMaster web portal, and as well as our Network Insights offering. And that is built using the API. We use all of our own API endpoints for that. So I mentioned the NetMaster web portal. This is a web interface for NetMaster that runs on ZOS. It's provides a lot of NetMaster functionality and of course SmartTrace as well. Almost every part of SmartTrace has been built into the web portal at this point, and we even have some web exclusive features that we'll talk about in a bit. The primary purpose of the web portal is to provide an easy to use interface for those that are less familiar with the 3270, or maybe you just prefer to work in a web-based environment. We see that sometimes. Being a smooth web-based application, it's super easy to quickly onboard and start a SmartTrace. Our primary goal here was to make the UI intuitive and easy to use so that if you're not as familiar with NetMaster or SmartTrace, you can easily take advantage of it. And we can see in the screenshot here, here's just a quick snippet from the web portal on how to create a trace definition. Again, pretty intuitive, pretty self-explanatory on how to do it, and that's really what we're going for here. So now we talk about Network Insights, which is similar to our NetMaster web portal, but this is our integration with Watchtower. I'm sure you've heard of Watchtower by now. We tend to talk about it quite a bit, but it's Broadcom's all-in-one observability and automation platform, and naturally NetMaster plays right into that role. Recently, we've noticed a trend of networking teams becoming more consolidated, or people taking on multiple roles, such as networking and something else. And with that in mind, there's less and less organizations have a full team that they can dedicate to network management, network optimization, network monitoring. And so thus we wanted to be a key player in Watchtower, as our product is perfect for what we're trying to do there, which is enabling fast problem resolution through efficient observability. When operators start seeing network issues, it's critical that they capture the network traffic at that time. We all know that not every problem is going to be easily reproducible. Most are sort of a one and done kind of thing. Thus, you only get really one shot at capturing the data you need. But by leveraging SmartTrace in Watchtower, you can be sure to capture not only the data at the time of the incident, but the critical data before and after the issue as well. Oftentimes that can be the most important data, is what happens before and after you see an issue. We really wanted to make SmartTrace easy and quick to use in Watchtower, because oftentimes operators and other users of Watchtower might not be as familiar with networking, let alone packet tracing. So we really prioritize easily being able to start these traces and view them. One of the other key benefits of Watchtower is it's easily accessible by people maybe in your organization that are not as in tune with the mainframe side of things. Our data on the mainframe is increasingly being used and sent to those outside of the mainframe sphere, and they need a way to interact with this networking data as well. And Network Insights provides that to them without them having to go into NetMaster or some other network management application. Last but not least, here we have our 3270 view in NetMaster as far as places we can work with SmartTrace. Here you can see a list of packets for a given trace, as well as some packet details, just a little sample of the data that we provide when actually looking at packet traces in NetMaster. I personally find the web interfaces are a bit easier to understand, but the 3270 green screen has its merits as well. One really cool thing about the 3270 interface in NetMaster is that we have field level help on pretty much every field here. So if you're looking at a trace, if you're creating a trace, and you don't know what something potentially is, what that field is, you can just do F1 and we'll provide help for that field, as well as when you might want to use that field, how you could take advantage of it, which is really useful. Another great thing we provide is when you're, say, creating a SmartTrace definition, say you need to specify your stack or your interface that you want to trace with. What we allow you to do is put a question mark on that field, and we'll give you the list of available options for you to select from. You'd be surprised how oftentimes people are not as familiar with their own networking environment in terms of what interfaces they might have up, what ports they have applications running on, etc. So if you put a question mark on most of our fields, we provide you that list to you, what is available to you to start tracing with, and the tracing options there. Again, we really wanted to make it easy for you to get up and running and tracing. So in addition to actually creating definitions in the SmartTrace panels, we also allow you to create smart traces from various other parts of the product. Say you're looking at a connection list. You have your list of connections, you see something you don't like about it. What you can do is you can just do the PT line command on it, and that'll start a packet trace for that specific connection. You don't need to bother setting up the host, the port, things like that. We'll fill in all of that for you. Just do the PT command in off you're going tracing stuff. I mentioned connection lists, but there's a ton of different places that you can do that from, whether it be your stack resources, enterprise extender resources, address space monitoring, IP nodes. There's a lot of different places that you can do that. And what we often see when customers are doing this is from that connection list page. Say they're looking for a connection, they see it, it doesn't have the security cipher they're expecting, or maybe it's using TLS 1.2 instead of 1.3. Just packet trace on that connection and you'll get all the information you could want about it. You could ever want about it. So great use case for it in terms of just ease of use here. So next we're going to talk about creating smart traces. If there's any questions on where you can create them, I'll take them now. If not, then we'll go ahead and start talking about actually creating these traces.
No, there's no questions in the chat.
Okay. So the basic premise of SmartTrace is pretty simple, right? You can create a SmartTrace definition, you start the SmartTrace definition, and then packets are collected based on the criteria that you specified. You can view, analyze, and study those results to sort of determine the flow of packets in your network and to really diagnose and resolve issues that you might be having. So when creating SmartTrace definitions via the 3270 panels, there's 4 panels that can be modified to help you create those traces. The first is going to be your basic criteria, and that's what you see here. The next is going to be tracing, more advanced tracing options. Then it's going to be stop criteria, so criteria to match on and then stop the trace if it matches that information. And then it's going to be tracing options, and that's just some ancillary things you can do, like how many packets you want to capture, things like that. But the first panel, and this is the basic criteria, this is what the vast majority of traces that are created are going to utilize. In here, we can specify the name, the description, as well as some basic filter criteria, just to help you narrow down on the packets you're trying to capture. This is where we see that stack name and interface name I mentioned earlier. Again, just put a question mark on them and you'll get the available options for those. And then, of course, hosts, local hosts and local ports, as well as foreign hosts and foreign ports. It's important to note here that we accept wildcards for these types of things. Say you just want to monitor local things on your local network, the 10.IP addresses. You can specify that like you see in the example here. We also support port ranges and multiple ports. So here we can see I have a criteria for port 23 and 923. So this is going to capture all telnet traffic, secure or insecure, on my network. And it's just a quick example of a basic trace that you can create. And again, we provide context-sensitive help for each one of these fields. So if you are not totally sure what one of them is, F1, and we'll give you everything that you could want to know about that field. So now that the basic traces is sort of understood, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the advanced trace filters that we have in the 3270 and in NetMaster. So I think sometimes these can get kind of complex, and I think it's best to walk through an example to sort of understand and realize the full capability that exists for this. So say we're diagnosing FTP in our network, and we're seeing some issues with it. It would be kind of difficult to capture all of that FTP traffic on our network and find out where the errors are and what could potentially be going wrong. And so we want to narrow down on just those packets that have errors, right? Where are we actually seeing the FTP errors? And we can do that by utilizing this advanced packet filtering. And so what this does is it looks at data following the TCP header and allows you to get pretty focused in on what packets you're capturing. And again, so in our scenario here, we want to capture FTP packets in error. And so what we will do here is build up this sort of expression that helps us determine the packet that we want to capture, and we'll only capture those packets. So first thing we need here is an operator, and we're going to do the equal operator. Next is going to be the data that we're actually looking for, and this is going to be the number 4 in ASCII at the first position in the packet following the TCP header. We'll also do that for the number 5 as well. And the reason behind that is similar to HTTP error codes. I'm sure you've all seen, a 404 page not found on the internet. So similar to HTTP status codes like that, FTP also has status codes. In those status codes, if they're in error, they'll either start with a 4 or a 5. So that's why we're specifying that here. Next is going to be a 20 in hex at the 4th position. And this is just sort of taking advantage of the FTP protocol and saying that, okay, we're going to see a number starting with a 4 or 5, followed up by a 20 in hex, which is a space. That's just ensuring that the data we're capturing is in fact, a TCP or FTP error packet. So then we'll build an expression. So we'll say either 1 or 2. So it can either start with a 4 or a 5, since those are both error packets, and then followed up by our third expression there, which is the space. And we'll start this trace. We'll have it running in the background. And so what that'll do is just sit there in the background while you're going about your day, looking at every packet that's coming through and evaluating it against our given criteria here. And only if it matches our criteria are we going to capture those packets. And so that's what we can see in this screenshot at the bottom of the page here, is we can see of our packets that we're capturing, we only see those 400 and 500 error codes. So that was a really easy way to go in and determine where our errors are happening and what those errors might be. We can see that it's happening on local port 21 here, and then we can see the errors associated with them. We're getting mismatched quotes, command failures, the connection aborted, and we can diagnose further from there based on the rest of the trace. And so that's just one example of the advanced packet filtering that we offer in SmartTrace. There's a ton of other ones out there. One that we've seen a couple customers do is looking for the TLS handshake and diagnosing errors that they see related to that handshake. It can be really useful for that. But there's a lot out there you can do with it. Another sort of more advanced filter that we provide is for TCP flags. So this is going to be flags on your TCP connection, SYN, reset, ACK, FIN, those types of flags. And we'll only capture packets that have a given flag. And we also can compose, expressions related to that as well. So in the example on the left there, you can see we're looking at reset and not FIN. So this is going to be connections that were reset. The connection probably dropped or something went wrong, excluding ones that, closed normally, if it's in that FIN state, probably closed just fine. So no need to look at those ones. Just going to look at the reset packets. We also provide a whole lot more specific filters based on other trace types that you're working with. We generally talk about TCP, but of course, there's a ton of other protocols out there: TCP, UDP, ICMP, OSA, Enterprise Extender. These are all trace formats or trace types that we support, and each one of those has their own filters and specific filters to help you get the data that you're after for those protocols. And again, we provide context-sensitive help for each one of those fields in there. So if you're a little unsure about what you're trying to go for, we provide information about that. So that's all about creating traces. Now let's talk a little bit about viewing traces and how we can actually look at the data in those traces. So if we're looking at this trace here, we can see what the trace is a chronological list of all the packets that matched our given criteria. We know there's a lot of data in traces, and thus we want to make it easy for you to find the information that you're after. We show the destination and source for the packet, as well as the delta in time between the packets. And this is a really useful field for if you're, say, looking at network slowdowns potentially. You say, okay, where is my slowdown happening in my network? It can be really difficult to determine that. But with this delta field, that'll show you the time difference between two packets. And so if you are looking at your trace and see, okay, there's like 3 seconds between these two packets, why is that happening? I know where at least it's happening, and I can see that based on that field. Again, super easy to see where you might be having a slowdown. Another really useful field that we display here in this trace or in this packet list is going to be the summary information. Packets are big things and they can contain a lot of data. And so we try to summarize the information that will be, sort of most applicable to you and most informative for you. And we try to, surface that up in this summary information field. Again, just really helps you determine, what is actually in this packet. Some packets don't have a whole lot of useful information to us. And we can see some of those here. They're just seeing, window size, the sequence number, things like that. Maybe not as useful for us. But at the top there, we'll see, there's a certificate in the TLS handshake, and that could be potentially useful to us. Now, again, these packet traces can be pretty big here. We can see this one is, 1100 packets. And so finding what we want in that trace can be a bit difficult sometimes, even more than just the summary information. You don't want to be paging through every single packet in this trace. So what you can do is use the find command. This acts just like any other find command you've used. You can do a find and it'll search through this panel and look for specific text that you're after. Now that's really useful, but what if we're looking at data within the packet itself that it was not surfaced in that summary information field? Well, that's where we have this, more complex, or not complex, but more advanced search functionality called tagging. And what the tag allows you to do is you can create a tag for any text that you're looking for. Say we're looking for the word certificate. We can create that tag, and what it'll do, NetMaster will go through the entire trace and look at every single packet, look at the data within those packets, and see if we see the word certificate in them anywhere. That process, very quick, and once it's done, we can see those are actually going to be highlighted in blue here, and we can see that they have the tag marker on the far left there. So this indicates to us that those packets have the word that we're after. In our case, it's going to be certificate. And then we can drill down into those and see where that might be happening. Help us diagnose where the exchange is happening, if they're changing certificates, if we're looking for a specific client certificate. That tagging feature really helped us, find out exactly what we're looking for in this gigantic trace. It's a really useful tool, and honestly, I use it all the time when looking at traces. And it's not something that I think a lot of users of SmartTrace know about. So I always like to highlight it whenever I can because it really is a great functionality. So next, we're going to cover some more features. So one of them is going to be the ability to merge two smart traces together. And what I mean by this is having two traces, whether they were on the same system or not, it doesn't matter. You can view the packets for those two traces at the same time. And we merge them together, and what you see is a chronological list of those two traces and the packets in those traces, sorted by color. We color code them to say which is which. This saves you a ton of time having to pull up the traces side by side and sort of comparing them. That can be difficult. So we added this ability to merge the two together. This can be really useful if you're trying to diagnose connections or multiple connections, or maybe just view multiple connections in a condensed format. Say you're calling out to an application, and that application in turn calls out to a database. And maybe you're seeing slowed connections or dropped connections as part of that, sort of application flow. What you can do is run a trace from your IP to that application, and then from that application to the database, and then merge those traces together to see that consolidated flow and view the real-time packets between all three parties. Really useful in determining multi-connection issues across applications. That's where we see this used most frequently. Another feature that I really like to talk about is the ability to import and export traces. So by import, pretty self-explanatory. You can bring in a trace as long as it's in that PCAP format into NetMaster, and then you can use the whole suite of smart tracing functionality on that trace. Doesn't matter where the trace was captured, as long as it's in that PCAP format. This can also be really convenient if you have a colleague who sends you a trace, or maybe you're moving traces from one region to the other. It can be really useful to import a trace. Exporting is sort of the opposite of that. You can take a trace that you have, export it as a libpcap format. Again, this is the standard file format across networking for packet traces. So you can take that file and open it up in a tool like Wireshark, which if you attended the previous session, was gone over in detail there. So again, we support exporting to those types of formats. And you can also open it up in Wireshark. Again, send it off to a colleague, maybe send it off to IBM if they need tracing information. Again, doesn't matter that it was captured in NetMaster. It can be exported as this PCAP format to do whatever you want with it, send it to whoever needs it. In the 3270 to export a trace, what you need to do is create a data set, make sure it has the right permissions, right record lengths, etc. And we know that that can be a bit of a challenge to get through sometimes, especially if you're newer to the environment here. And that's where our sort of web interface, the web portal or Network Insights comes really into handy. It really comes in hand to help us do that, because what you can do there is just click on the trace that you're working with in the web interface and click the download button. And that works just like any other download in your browser. It'll just download it to your local PC, and then you can do whatever you need with it there. No need to worry about data sets, permissions, FTP settings, security issues. Again, with the web portal and Network Insights, you just download it to your local PC, no problem, super fast. Another feature about SmartTrace that I love talking about is the ability to copy trace definitions. Now, whether that be a local copy or a remote copy, a local copy is pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to make a direct copy of that trace definition in your NetMaster region and be able to work with it in there. Or what's perhaps a little more interesting is you can remote copy trace definitions. So if you have maybe like a linked NetMaster region, what you can do is copy a trace from one region to the other region. And that's really useful if you're just making some quick changes when you need to move it over into a different region that's monitoring potentially some different traffic. One thing to note about that is we do validate that for you. So when you copy into a remote definition, you might not have the exact same setup in terms of stacks, interfaces, etc. And so what we'll do is we'll validate that trace definition against the region that you're moving it into and make sure that it's all good. We're not going to allow you to create a trace definition that isn't valid for that that NetMaster region. Next, I just want to go over a couple miscellaneous tips in SmartTrace that I think are really useful and that sometimes people don't really know about. And the first thing that we're going to go over is going to be the ability to schedule smart traces. This can be particularly useful if you want to trace applications after your regularly scheduled IPL or potentially after some regular maintenance. It can be really beneficial to schedule a trace. Say you're expecting increased traffic that might stress your network at a particular time and day. It might be beneficial to start a trace proactively at that time, just in case you see any issues in there. Naturally, when it comes to SmartTrace, we're talking about sensitive data here. And so we have a whole lot of functionality to secure SmartTrace and make sure that it's locked down as it's needed. NetMaster provides a lot of that access control, but of course you can defer that entirely to your ESM, RACF, ACF2, top secret, and control all of the access in NetMaster with those ESMs. Now, when we talk about specific packet level data, we know that requires some extra sensitivity to it because there can be some pretty secure information in there that you wouldn't want other people to see. And so we have a specific SAF resource class that you have to explicitly give permission to users or user groups for, so that nobody sees packet level data unless they're explicitly given that permission. Again, we really take security pretty serious here. And so we need to make sure that SmartTrace, is as secure as can be given the sensitive nature of these things. So another great feature, and this is one of those things that I mentioned that are exclusive to our Network Insights and the NetMaster web portal, is going to be SmartTrace favorites. What favorites are they allow you to select a trace, specify it as a favorite in the web interface there, and then you can load from that favorited definition. So say you have a lot of trace or a trace that you are frequently making changes to or that you use a lot, you can set that as a favorite so it appears right at the top of your list. And then if you just need to make a quick change to that trace, maybe you just need to change a port or maybe some part of the IP address, what you can do is load from that favorite. Everything gets pre-filtered or pre-selected for you based on that trace definition that was favorited. And then you can make your quick change and send it, start the trace. No need to go and specify every single field over and over again. By loading from that favorite, we provide a lot of that there for you. Another thing that I like to mention that we introduced a number of years ago, but I think it's always good to mention and remind folks about it because it really increases SmartTrace's capabilities. And that was the ability to increase the amount of packets that are in a single trace. Previously, that limit was 100,000, but a couple years ago, we upped this limit to 250,000 now. It's not enabled by default, so that's why I think a lot of customers don't know that that functionality has increased. You do have to go and enable that in your SSI. There's an SSI parameter, PA MMTT size. You can see our doc for that as well. and you can specify that up to 250,000 packets captured in a single trace. Now, again, there's going to be a lot of packets, 250,000 packets in a trace is a lot. There's not really any performance or CPU issues that you have to worry about there. We're very efficient in our tracing. But when you're actually looking at that trace, there's going to be naturally a lot of packets. So you need to sort of filter on the packets that you're interested in. And that's where that filtering I mentioned earlier, the tagging, the searching, things like that can really help narrow down on those more general traces. I also just like to call out that we do support SmartTrace in NetMaster. Obviously we think SmartTrace is a great functionality, but we do support SmartTrace as well. We provide a bunch of interfaces to SmartTrace. This can be really useful if, using SmartTrace, it's oftentimes you have to reference the manuals and the docs and try and look at the commands and make sure you specify everything as the command is required. And it can be a bit tedious to have to do that, especially if you're doing it frequently. And by incorporating SmartTrace into NetMaster, we just really simplify the process for you. So even if you do need to use SmartTrace for whatever reason, you can do that and get a lot of the benefits of SmartTrace. As we wrap up here, I just want to also call out that we do have a whole host of samples and sample definitions to help you get started in SmartTrace. Now, these range from, SNMP traps, detecting port scans, various, ICMP issues that you might be encountering. Basically, a bunch of common networking scenarios that you might want to capture traces for. And we provide those as samples so you could just tweak them if you need for your environment and really just get you started in SmartTrace. Again, at our core here in SmartTrace, we want to make this as easy to use for as many people. Less time, fiddling with the bits and pieces, more time tracing and analyzing and diagnosing your network issues. So that was a quick rundown on SmartTrace. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them, explore more of the functionality with it. Again, I do this stuff every day. I love networking and network tracing. So I'm all ears if you want to, send a chat in now or send me an email, something like that later on. I'm available. If there's no questions, thank you for coming out, and please scan the QR code and review the session. That really helps us out, helps us tailor our sessions to what best suits your needs. But that's about all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Phil. Doesn't look like there's any questions.
All righty.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Yep. Pleasure talking to everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.